Hello and welcome back to another Monster Monday, a series where I draw a creature from D&D and I talk about its lore and its history and what it's like to fight in-game as well. Today's topic was suggested by Johan53100 and they've asked to hear about orcs. And you know what, I'm glad that he has, because as much as I do love elves, I'm pretty sure orcs might be the best, and unequivocally one of the coolest species in D&D. With that though comes an absolute ton of lore, so buckle yourself in because this might be a long one. Before I get started though, just remember that on the 7th of September I'll be doing a giveaway of a copy of Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes for my 1-year anniversary with this channel. All you have to do is email me a copy of one of your drawings of a monster, maybe a homebrew creature or a creature from the monster manual, what have you. I'll feature your art on the channel, and my favourite picture will get awarded the Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes. There's a link to my email down in the description box, but in case you don't read that, it's info.arcaneforge@gmail.com. I'll also be doing a question and answer round, so if you have any questions for me, make sure to leave in brackets down below in the comment section, video question. I'll answer whatever I can for you. But anyway, let's get started with the video. Orcs are so innately tied to fantasy that they're almost an intrinsic part of any medieval fantasy world. Maybe even some that aren't actually fantasy or medieval. They show up in the Lord of the Rings, Warhammer, Warcraft, Elder Scrolls, the Divinity Original Sin games, Fallout. They could even be the Klingons in Star Trek. Some sources point to Saxon stories like Beowulf, featuring orcs or orc-like creatures anyway. So just like dwarves and elves, they are a conventional part of any fantasy storytelling. In each adaptation, their personalities change, and I'm honestly not sure of my absolute favourite way to imagine and use these creatures because there are so many ways that you can. But if we were to boil it down right to the simplest level, what are orcs generally speaking? Broad strokes of orcs seem to be common across most of their representations are that they're large, strong, savage humanoid creatures with green, yellow, sometimes black skin, a bloodthirsty and warring ideology, and their driving motivations tend to be at odds with humans and all species that desire civilization and safety. Sometimes they have visibly boar or pig-like features, most notably large tusk-like teeth protruding from their bottom jaw. Otherwise, they're pretty much up to the user, however they want to use something that seems savage in their storytelling. Whenever I use orcs in my role-playing campaigns, I like to think about what sort of story I want to tell with them. There's a lot of themes that sort of revolve around orcs no matter how you want to use them or what story you want to tell, because they could either be savage and brutal battle fodder due to their intrinsic easiness with which they fit into a kind of familiar fantasy world. You might want to use them to represent savagery of nature, of this kind of Darwinian natural selection, only the strong surviving. Perhaps you want to turn that on its head and have orcs be misrepresented as savage, whereas really their natural nature, they are in fact just druidic or shamanistic or very in touch with nature, whereas the rest of the world is developing in a far more technological way. However you want to use them, they are almost always the anti-protagonists. They are almost always the antagonists. In whatever sense you want to use them, they tend to be the opposite to your good guy. In fact, orcs were introduced to D&D as one of the first creatures to fight in the 1974's sort of earliest edition of D&D, and kind of expressly because of their potential genericness. Orcs of all kinds, even today, hover around the sort of challenge rating 2 style creature, so that keeps them at a fairly low level individually, which means you can fight them early on, and that's pretty much always been the case. But importantly, they've also always had an evil alignment, even from the very early days. They were depicted as inherently evil creatures with no redeeming qualities, and this is so that good aligned players, especially paladins, could kill them without remorse or consequence, because otherwise it was seen as a bit iffy. Paladins back in the day didn't consider slaying evil creatures as murder. They were very against harming anything that wasn't evil. This would not be against the tenets of their chosen deity. So orcs were depicted as innately a menace, and they needed to be exterminated so that paladins could still be in keeping with their holy tenets, but at the same time didn't need to be pacifists. Since then, our sensibilities and the stories we want to tell through this game have become more complex and nuanced, although, unfortunately for orcs, they're still of an evil alignment. It's sometimes good to have a play around with their kind of evil tropes, by having your players mercilessly slaughter a band of orcs, only to find letters from their loved ones, photos of family members, or Employee of the Month badges in their belongings when your adventurers come to loot their corpses. You can use this to uproot their assumptions and have them seek penance for having judged a whole species by their appearance, or the actions of perhaps a few orcs that they've met before, some radical orcs. The first time I encountered orcs was in the Warhammer 40,000 franchise, where in the grim and gothic universe of the 41st millennium, orcs are enormous and war-crazed imbeciles who outnumber all other sentient species in the galaxy, and have intense battle prowess and survivability, but lack coordination or intelligence to band together to wipe out the other species. They're junkers assembling guns and spaceships out of the rubble left behind from their bloody conquests. It's believed that they understand so little about their constructions, about their weapons and machinery, that they must be reality-altering psychics, who unbeknownst to them are able to cause their technology to work because they will it, and their leaders grow enormously in size to become towering hulks only because others fear them and make them as strong as they fear. They're equal parts terrifying and small-minded comedians who, all through their jaw-distorting tusks,
speak with Cockney accents and dress like an X-Train Mad Max,
performing idiotic acts until they somehow coordinate under one banner in a world-shaking warband called a Wah, which mimics the terrifying battle cry these creatures adopt when they band together.
Hey, look over there. Who are them gits? Them some Yumis, boss. Yumis? Go get me Shooter and me Skull Smasher. Looks like it's time for a war!
Just like the orcs of the 40k universe, the super mutants of Fallout serve the same purpose. In those games, they're savage, super strong junkers, and were similarly created through genetic experimentation, with an aim to generate super soldiers. Conversely, the orcs of the Lord of the Rings were once majestic elves, as, in Tolkien's stories, evil cannot create independently, only corrupt and embitter. These elves were corrupted and enslaved, tortured and reshaped by Melkor, the first Dark Lord of Middle-earth, and Master of Sauron, into a pure and irredeemably evil species, emerged, an antithesis to the elves they once were. Enslaved rather than free, aggressive rather than nurturing, base and savage rather than refined and elegant. Interestingly, as elves are quite feminine and perhaps maybe androgynous in Lord of the Rings, it could be that orcs represent hypermasculinity, or in fact their aggressiveness as anti-elves could be seen as a message about toxic masculinity and the harm that bullying and repressed emotions could have on a society. We know that Tolkien was an enormous fan of elves, and that orcs seem to represent the absolute opposite of them. Elves seem to be Tolkien's kind of ideologically perfect species, if such a thing existed for him. Similarly, the orcs, or Orzamer of the Elder Scrolls series, were once elves, of a kind, who worshipped a god who was transformed into a Daedra, a demon prince, by another jealous god, and with that corruption came a curse that transformed his followers in kind, mutating them into the orcs we now know. Believed to be demon spawn by their other species of the Elder Scrolls, they're seen as savage and violent, but they may not actually be. Not inherently, anyway. But over time, orcs have acted up and accepted these misperceptions, often doing their own people a disservice by playing up to stereotypes. But secretly, they're just cursed elves who have suffered years and years of abuse and hardship as a result of racism. The orcs of the Warcraft universe are similarly misunderstood and corrupted by demonic magic. Originally hailing from the planet of Draenor, the orcs were a deeply shamanistic and nature-loving species descending from stone giants They were corrupted when their false prophet, called Gul'dan, convinced them to consume the blood of demons in order to survive, travelling to another planet, as their own one was dying. They arrived on Azeroth, a different world, tainted by demons' blood, their skin transformed into a green hue, and their minds corrupted with the manic blood rage that coursed through them. They fell victim to their violent impulses, making quick enemies of the native populace of humans that lived on this new world. Later on, when their minds were cleared and their bodies purged of this blood, they still remained green, although they desired to return to their peaceful ways. But the native inhabitants could not be swayed or convinced to see them as anything other than savage barbarians and a blight invading their planet. So with orcs, it really depends on the kind of story that you want to tell. They could be violent and stupid, or nature-loving and misunderstood, but they're a staple part of D&D and can be used in a myriad of different ways. The word orc is believed to stem from Orcus, a Roman god of the underworld, and carries with it this kind of evil and demonic connotation, although the word became orca, O-R-K-E in the Old English, and was used synonymously to mean a devil, a bogeyman, or an ogre. It wasn't until a fairy tale writer in the 1500s named Giambattista Basile from Italy wrote of tusked monsters called Huorcos, Huorcos, that the modern interpretation of orcs were born, and later expanded upon by Tolkien to become the modern orc that we all now know. With tusks and fangs being the original descriptive features, David C. Sutherland originally illustrated orcs as literal pigmen or boarmen for the first monster manual in 1977, a set of illustrations that would influence the designs of Star Wars when it came time to depict the savage, green-skinned porcine Gamorreans who guard Jabba the Hutt. But what about D&D? What, if any of this, is supposed to have influenced the writers of D&D over the years? Well, some of it. Largely the influences of Lord of the Rings are present, but D&D orcs have their own fascinating lore and culture. In D&D lore, orcs were created by a god called Grumsh, One Eye, he who watches. They have a pantheon of other gods, which most species would be absolutely a blessing to. Most would get to live in the comfort that you are being watched and potentially protected by a powerful creature. Not so for the orcs. Their many gods are inherently at odds with each other. Grumsh, a vengeful and angry god of hatred and conquest. Ilnivol, the war maker, a god of strategy, pacing and skill. Bargtru, the leg breaker, a god of cruelty, malice, brutality and torture. Luthic, the cave mother, goddess of community, life, safety, nurturing, of home and protection. Yertrus, the white hand, god of infestation, of disease, whispers and the dead. And Shargas, the night lord, god of darkness, the unknown, stealth, depravity and cannibalism. All of their agendas enormously conflict. Raising a family, building a home, and protecting them may please Luthic, but could bring the wrath of Yertrus and Bargtru. A bloody, rage-filled conflict may appease Bargtru and Shargas, but your lack of tactics may offend Grumsh and Ilnivol. There is simply no way to win as an orc, and as such they live in a constant state of anger, terror, panic, anxiety, and paranoia. To be an orc is to be constantly afraid of your every action. To them, everything is an omen or a sign that will hopefully lead to briefly appeasing one or maybe several of their gods. So to orcs, their warring, raiding and terrorizing may always stem from an initial hope to be free from the paranoia-inducing and frankly exhausting sounding gaze of their gods. Even their enormous and mighty war chiefs aren't immune. They must constantly appear strong and fierce, more so than all around them, for risk of being killed and possibly cannibalized in the glorious name, or perhaps names, of several of the orc gods. So an orc throne is never a comfortable one. Now there's some interesting parallels to real-world mythologies in this. It can be drawn between the orcish gods and possibly to to the Norse, most notably the worship of Grumsh One-Eye. He sounds like another god that we're all familiar with. That's right, Odin, the one-eyed god of war, of cunning and tactics, the ever-watchful god with his 2 ravens on his shoulders telling him secrets from all around the world. Orcs fight with unbridled rage and savagery, but have a particular hatred for elves. They may slaughter and pillage a human city, or carve up halflings for their bones, which they believe might bring good luck. They're actually fairly lenient when it comes to dwarves, only coveting their well-built homes, content to commandeer them, even letting the dwarves live if they throw down their arms and flee. But elves need to be butchered in unimaginable and horrific ways, down to the last man, woman and babe. And once this is done, an orc may sacrifice an elf corpse to Grumsh. If they do, there's a chance that an aspect of Grumsh will appear, pleased by the bloodbath, and offer an exchange of power. The warrior, soaked in elven blood, will gouge out one of their eyes to more closely resemble Grumsh, and this aspect of the orcish creator will bless them with divine powers, transforming them into an eye of Grumsh. Maybe just a metaphorical or symbolic title, or perhaps one of the spies of this king of the orcish pantheon, seeing through their hollow eye sockets just as Odin's ravens would, his spies like Hugin and Munin. This rite of passage, this ritual, slightly mirrors Norse mythology. It's said that the young and the teenage would worship Thor, a god of thunder, but importantly, more often seen as a god of war, a god of conflict and barbarity. Berserkers would often call on Thor to possess them and take them into a trance where they would feel no pain and soak themselves in the blood of their enemies. They were hot-headed and rash, childlike in their anger, until they reach a certain level of age and maturity, at which point people would stop worshipping Thor and instead worship Odin, the Allfather, still a war god but embodiment of his entire pantheon. The one-eyed old man of war, who instead of the barbarity of conflict and reveling in fighting, was more a god of tactics and precision, of leading. Changing the god that you primarily worship in later age was seen as representative of no longer being a man on the front lines, taking the blows, but instead becoming a commander, a general, someone who led forces into battle and could see war beyond the fight ahead of you, but could plan and become a tactician. So too, perhaps, are the eyes of Grumsh. Perhaps they follow Ilnval or Bugtrue, the leg breaker, and are more into savagery and the initial feeling of conflict. They are concerned only with the battle ahead, trying to appease their blood god. But when they see the opportunity and can take part in a ritual, thinking about their future for the first time in their lives, they pledge themselves to Grumsh, the king of all gods, and can see now clearly through his eye. Eyes of Grumsh are rewarded with magical and divine powers, able to cast spells and empower their attacks with magical force. A fitting reward for a realization there is more to conflict than just the battle in front of you. Another type of orc present in the monster manual are Orcs, most notably different from their other kin by having +1 intelligence, as to most other orcs having a -2 or a +0 in the case of war chiefs. This is a change that happens at birth, and presumably is the work of the god Luthic, blessing them in their infancy. They grow strong, but also far more intelligent than any of their other kin. They live underground in the darkness. They're more independent and cunning naturally, and often pose a threat to their war chiefs. They're often seen as psychopathic, still reveling in conflict and murder, but they're more cunning and visibly delight in it. Emotionless, but ever plotting and ever thinking. Perhaps rather than Luthic, they are blessed by Shalgas instead. But this seems to mirror the Uruk-hai from the Lord of the Rings. There's even a similarity in the name. Orogs, Uruk. It doesn't seem like a coincidence to me. The Uruk-hai were the fighting orcs. Uruk literally meaning orc, and hai meaning person. The orcish people. Treebeard in the Lord of the Rings even speculates that these more intelligent, more brutish, taller and darker skinned orcs must be crossbreeds between orcs and men. But that leads us into half-orcs, and that's something I don't necessarily want to cover today. There's still much more to cover in the topic of orcs in general, so I think I'll come back to them when it comes time to do a deep dive on each of the playable species, because orcs are in fact playable species in Volo's Guide to Monsters, and of course we have half-orcs that are playable in the base game. But I hope that this gave you a nice understanding of orcs and some interesting ideas about how you might want to shape them and use them for your own homebrew worlds, or just to mix it up. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please make sure to leave a little thumbs up, a little like down below, perhaps favourite this video, and share it with the rest of your party who might need to learn about the orcish menace. If you enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more of the stuff that I do, please make sure to subscribe and hit the little bell icon. We're just little orclings ourselves, so anything you can do like that really helps the channel to grow, so thank you very much. If you have a suggestion for a monster you'd like to see me draw, please make sure to leave that in the comment section below, and I'll add it to my to-draw list, which is ever growing, but it's full of very exciting monsters. So I'll draw those in the order that I receive them. If you love this drawing in particular and you'd like a copy for yourself, please make sure to head over to my Patreon page, where backers at all sorts of levels get different rewards, some of which are prints of my Monster Monday drawings, either digitally or physically. And remember that I'm doing a Tome of Foes giveaway on the 7th of September, so make sure to email me your drawings of monsters over at info.arcaneforge@gmail.com for a chance to win a copy of Tome of Foes, and also send in some video questions if you'd like to ask me anything about myself, about the channel, or about D&D in general. Anyway, I hope you and your warband gather all the axes and loincloths that you need to take on your foes, and until next time, happy monster hunting.
Well, this accent is worryingly addictive. Please make sure to like, comment and subscribe.